Now, people ask me oftentimes, why is it, Glenn, that you care about trying to reform government or trying to improve the way government works or try to downsize government or just get involved and dig into all these problems that local government has? And I have an analogy that I want to just share with my viewers here and see if it maybe better explains the concerns that I have with government largely that I see out there. And it really has to do with a building, a home that was being built near a friend of mine, and he lived out in Klickitat County, if you know where that is, sort of in the southwest Washington, kind of center of Washington. And this home was being built by a large developer, big commercial developer that basically doesn't hire very many American citizens, and they're using just a lot of foreign labor, and they get these cookie cutter designs. And in this case, this home was being constructed near him, and he had a lot of experience with construction materials and the processes that are involved in it. And it was being built for two college professors who were retiring, and was going to be their retirement home, or they should say they are planning to have it to be their retirement home. And he had a chance to actually watch how this thing was built. And forget the plans and the code enforcement and all the things that you would imagine that should exist in this case. He watched this house be built with, for instance, concrete that had zero rebar reinforcing in it, was also made very thin, which inevitably means that within the next 3 to 5 years, when those people drive their car into the garage, that nice looking paved garage, that the foundation's going to crack. There's no doubt about that. It'll crack probably 3 to 5 years from now, and they'll start to have all kinds of problems in that home. He watched them put up a roof that used substantially thinner plywood than it should have had. It had half-inch or a little bit less, and it wasn't even plywood. It was actually pressboard. And on top of that, when they put the shingles up on the roof, they didn't even put flashing in the valleys, basically the hip joints of that roof. What that means is that it's going to leak. The roof will leak probably within about 5 years. They'll have leaks all over the home. Thirdly, one of the things that he really noticed that was pretty dramatic was watching the fact that they didn't insulate the garage. They put sheetrock up to kind of hide the fact they didn't insulate it. And yet, what they did in that garage area, that's where they put the hot water tank and that's where they put the pressure tank, which basically means that when it gets very cold, and it gets cold in that area, below 10 this last winter alone, that the water pipes are going to break and they're going to have water leakage all over the place. Finally, on top of all that, just to add insult to injury, the builders were not putting in nearly enough outlets anywhere in fact, it was the barest minimum outlets that they could put in, including whole sections of the garage where this couple really did plan on having refrigerators, and there wasn't a single outlet anywhere in the garage there. Just all kinds of problems, and I'm really just covering the basics of just this basic overview of this. My friend, had contacted them because these were going to be his future neighbors, and he said, listen, these guys are really not doing the right thing here for you. And the neighbors, these college professors, said, oh, this is our retirement home. I'm sure that we signed a contract. I'm sure it's going to be okay. We trust that they're going to do the right thing here. For the most part, they didn't even understand what he was explaining to them. And you might think, wait a second, that sounds like a building that's built below code. Yeah, it is. It's certainly not how it should be built. But because it's a large developer and the code enforcement was nowhere to be found, and because they were using non-U.S. speaking, English speaking, employees, I think the code enforcement just decided not to come out, and they never bothered to even look at the building anyway, as best you could tell. Or at least if they did, it was just a superficial kind of review. Now the home, as it starts to come together, and I stopped by and looked at it myself, it looks nice. I put a great facade on the outside, and everything looks good on the outside. So when these two college professors do finally retire and they move in there, they'll think that they have a nice home. But the problems will start soon after, and within a few years, they'll start having much greater costs, much greater problems, and pretty soon they will be regretting the approach they took to build that home. To me, it just seemed like kind of an interesting analogy for what I've seen with government. Government likes to put on a great facade and pretend like they're doing everything right, and they don't want to look any deeper than surface level. They want you to believe that because they have a nice building or they have these rules and these regulations that they're going to be running the government the way it should be. But unfortunately, increasingly, the closer we look, the deeper we dive, that's not the case. Then it's not because there's a great conspiracy necessarily at local government level. I would consider it more of a bandwagon effect. And that the lack of transparency, the lack of auditing, the recognition that most people just don't pay attention and don't want to look at what's going on in government means that in most of our governments, local governments, state governments, we're going to find that the foundation's cracked because there is no rebar. The roof's going to leak, that there's not adequate insulation. There's all kinds of the shortcomings. And it is worth us paying attention to government to try to fix these things ahead of time and when we find them, so that we don't have to be stuck like those two college professors with basically a house that's going to be a lemon for the rest of their lives, and with the regret that we'll have that we didn't spend just a little bit more time in the beginning fixing these problems. So perhaps when it comes to government, that our children don't have to deal with these problems in the future. Now, I don't know if this analogy works for you. It's one of the ways I like to explain and describe the problems that we see with government around us today. It's that house that looks like really nice on the outside, and it's just going to be falling apart around their ears shortly after they purchase it and they move in. We don't have to have government like that. We can actually do a much better job than what we're doing today. But in order to do so, we have to have willingness to work, to pay attention, to actually dig into the truth about what's going on in local government. So I hope that this works for you as far as analogy goes, and I want to encourage more people like you to get involved and start paying attention to what's happening in local government. It's one thing that I always say in all my videos, and I'll say it again here. The only way you can change anything is if you bother to show up, because the future belongs to those who show up.